Oh
Yeah,
they
says it's recording.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Well, this week we looked at Roger Scruton, and we did the reading, the meaning of conservatism that he wrote in 2001. I can't see it. Okay. So here are just some personal thoughts that I got on the reading. I thought it was much easier to comprehend than previous political thinkers. I don't know if you guys got that as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially Rawls and Koukouthis last week.
Yeah.
And even though I didn't agree with most of the stuff he says, I can say that he was really articulate in his argument. Previously with conservatism, I didn't really understand their reasoning. I just knew the idea that they wanted to preserve or resist change, but he did make some really rational and logical arguments that were quite new, so it was interesting. Here he is. Okay, so here's his definition of conservatism that was throughout the reading, and his idea of society. So he wrote that it's a limp definition to describe conservatism as the desire to conserve, and he didn't like that stereotype. And so his definition that he wrote on page 10 was that conservatism arises directly from the sense that one belongs to something continuing, a pre-existing social order, and the fact that it is all important to determining what to do. So the bold bits are just what I found most important, and that this order could be a society or a nation or a club or school or whatever. But the key point is the pre-existing. And he defines society as a social organism, which stems from Burke's writing. And he compared it to liberalism. The idea of liberalism is a machine, but conservatism is an organism. And our role as citizens is to preserve that organism. And it is shaped by reasoned and rational intellectuals. And then a quote that he has here is that conservatism presupposes the existence of a social organism. Its politics is concerned with sustaining the life of that organism through sickness, health, change, and decay. That comes a lot through his reading. And then this is really important. He said that a society is a contract between the living, dead, and unborn, which is a really prominent theme, and that our role as citizens, we have to respect those people that have died because they're the ones that have built our institutions and our unis, our hospitals, everything in society. And that through the political process, we must always include the unborn and the dead and the living. And that's what liberalism fails to do, but I'll get onto that. This is the criticisms of democracy and liberalism. So he wrote that the pinnacle enemy of conservatism is liberalism because its idea of individual autonomy and the natural rights of man, which I found rather concerning. Scruton doesn't believe that the value of individual liberty should be absolute. He believes the authority of well-established governments is more important. For Scruton, freedom is a subordinate social goal, and there's other goals that come before it, which was quite similar to last week in our tutorial. We're talking about Rawls and how toleration was important, but not the most important. Justice was. So people see themselves as inheritors rather than creators in society, we inherit society. And this quote was quite interesting, summed up what he thought about democracy. He wrote, "There is, however, a deeper reason for conservative suspicion of the democratic process, which is that, however fair and free, it will always give precedence to the needs and desires of those who are choosing now, regardless of the needs and desires who are not with us yet or who have already died." And then this ties well into, he talked a bit about common law and written constitutions. And he claims that written constitutions ignore the logic of common law and that they're just like an abstract formula. In the case of the American Constitution, the leaders of the time just made that up. He doesn't believe that the written constitution is effective. All rational citizens will have an inherent understanding of common law, which is built and ingrained into history and tradition. And then he also mentioned that the English common law specifically has its roots in Roman law, so it's been embedded for centuries. He wrote, people's rights are naturally embedded in common law. A measure of freedom and an expectation of a just and fair treatment is natural. The organism of society is shaped by a reasoned intellect. This intellect is the constitution through which the self-image of society is formed. Such a constitution, like the rational principle in people, will recognize ties, obligations, privileges, and duties. And then we get onto his criticisms of natural and human rights, which could be quite interesting when we get to the question of liberal democracy. It's quite similar to his concept of common law, but he's not a supporter of natural human rights. He wrote that conservatives will be loath to find their political enterprise upon any idea of universal or natural rights. The doctrine of natural rights is an attempt to avoid the penalty which all true rights impose. And there are only rights where there are obligations, and whose obligation is it to provide to citizens? And then he talked a bit about the United Nations, and he's a bit like suspicious of that because they wouldn't really understand what members of a particular nation would want. Then he said that British citizens are fortunate inheritors of human rights, like it's not a right, and that he claims that welfare is a gift and not a right. And then again, he says that legislation is a privilege. So that's a common theme that comes up across a few pages. The notion of rights has achieved an unnatural predominance in language of politics. Yeah, that's pretty basic. And then he says that we must reject the language of the rights of man, which liberalism obviously puts forward. And then this is another quote. For Scruton, human rights cause the state to become a machine, the center of distribution, and alien product, because the person who's elected at the time gets to choose like who withholds these rights and who doesn't. Like it's dependent on the leader, and for the conservative state, it's an organism and machine, so they oppose to the idea. Yeah, okay, last slide before we get to the questions. And then here's his perspective on the monarchy and aristocracy. So he's really pro-monarchy. He thinks it does the best job at providing a voice to members of the community who aren't here. So the people who aren't born yet or who haven't died, but I would argue against that. And Scruton believes that if a democracy claims to be rational, then wouldn't it provide a voice to all people, including those people who are dead? And because monarchs are not elected by popular vote, they are therefore not self-interested, that's his claim, and that they don't represent the interests to the present generation. They're concerned with the long-term future of society rather than the immediate demands. And he calls monarchs the voice of history. And then he presents aristocracy as the ultimate solution. He claims that the term aristocracy comes from the Greek meaning rule by the best. and he believes that democracy produces that democracy produces leaders who rule by the worst. And then he compares that to the history of Germany, which was quite concerning. I don't think that was a good comparison. And then lastly, but in the true essence of the term, they will uphold the public duty because they care about societies and traditions. So, yeah, that's his idea.
Thank you.
That's okay. And here we have the questions. I don't know. What are you guys thinking?
God, I disagreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially that point about, I guess, having to take into account, dead people and people who haven't been born yet. He already points out, like, a common criticism. It sort of inhibits, like, the autonomy of people who are living now.
Yeah.
But I think it also presupposes that we're able to sort of determine what people who are dead and both dead and not born. It's that he assumes that we know what they think.
That's
so true. We should put that in a question.
Yeah, so, that's a really good point.
Yeah, so like, how are we supposed to identify the wishes of the dead and unborn within the context of, I guess, democratic decision making or something like that?
Yeah. Oh God, there was so much in that I just completely disagreed with.
I thought he made a pretty good argument though when I was reading it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, a lot of.
I have a problem with, like, all the readers. I'm like, oh, I can relate to that, all the past ones, but this one I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
I always feel like he's just trying, like, so hard to be, like, because the edgiest thing he could be was being like, oh, I'm actually conservative and I'm going to, like, define it. So it seems like he's kind of reactionary in that way. And it's funny because he hates reactionaries, but in some, I think in a lot of ways he is
really
like
does.
a reactionary conservative, because he's kind of like, oh, like, he even says he became conservative because he saw the protests in France, like in Paris. Yeah. Like, these guys don't appreciate anything. And I think he does a really good job of, like, certain things, like, especially kind of pointing out that nobody really, like, understands, like, how much goes into creating these things, like, all the things, like, it's not just, you don't just write a constitution and those things suddenly exist. Like, there's a huge amount of stuff. I think that's, like, a really good point. But then it seems like such a stretch when he's like, monarchs understand what the future generations want. Like, not really good track record of that exactly. But.
Yeah. No, I didn't like his monarch argument.
Yeah.
Or aristocracy.
He's trying to, like, stir the pot a bit and be, like, really, like, I don't know.
He's
like,
definitely trying to stir the pot for sure.
Yeah.
Like, if you listen to, like, all of his, like, I don't know, I was gonna do him as my political thinker guy, as the one from the readings, but then I ended up changing it at the last second. But I listened to heaps of his stuff, and he definitely likes being like the witty conservative guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm reading a bit about him just on Wikipedia and stuff, and he used to, like, purposely go to universities where he knew he wouldn't be supported because they're so, like.
Oh my God.
And then they would bring him off stage, so it was kind of attention seeking in a way, because, like, he knows they're not gonna.
Yeah, he definitely loves playing the, like, I have been silenced card, like, which is fair, because he should, like, I mean, because people shouldn't scream at him, but he definitely he goes out of his way. He definitely he pretends like he definitely loves it though, that he cops that shit though.
I think he made a kind of a good point about, like, I think he's trying to say there needs to be a separation of powers type thing, but aristocracy and monarchy doesn't really seem like the best way to go about that.
God, no. Yeah. I get, like, he doesn't like the liberal idea, but I mean, come on, man. Really? It's a bit of a leap to make.
Yeah.
Okay, liberal democracy argument. Oh, jeez.
No.
It's always this one.
Yeah.
It's always this one.
I guess we could do something about, like, well, he doesn't like liberal democracy. We know that. So I guess we could say something about, like, his idea of like the monarchy or aristocracy being the best solution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think definitely, and especially engage with kind of the idea that democracy doesn't have an appreciation for the past, and it has a favors the present. I think something, because I think that's the core of what the whole monarchy. I think is kind of just, it's more just being like, oh, like if someone has an appreciation for the past more than anything.
Yeah, but they probably only have an appreciation of like their own personal family's past.
Yeah, I'd like my history too if I'd been really rich the whole time.
Yeah. They just want to preserve their own power and wealth. They care about
and he says there somewhere in the text, he's like politicians can't be blamed for trying to amass power or something. Like, he says that somewhere. I'm like, okay. Like,
no.
You could kind of say, well, when he says that liberal democracy is bad because it's like gives precedence to people choosing now and people who don't know about the issues enough. But the other thing is, people in a monarchy don't necessarily know these things either.
Yeah.
Just because they're born into it doesn't mean that they're experts. So that kind of contradicts his argument a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay. How would I word that?
I guess something like how can his proposed, like, I know.
Government?
Yeah, like, or, yeah, political system of monarchy / aristocracy. Like,
But isn't that moving too far away from the democracy? Because don't we need to more focus on his, like, the implications for the actual for like the current system, rather than like his alternative.
This question's kind of confusing because it's stakes of the text argument for liberal democracy, but he's not arguing for
for it.
Yeah.
What is he arguing for? Like,
he's arguing against
democracy.
Against it.
But he still likes democracy, right?
I think in like the last paragraph he talks about what he'd prefer from our current system. So he says, like, we should be moving, I guess, power from sort of speculative change institutions like Parliament to more, I guess, autonomous institutions like the judiciary, like the House of Lords or something. Yeah. So I guess something we could ask is, how will reducing the legislative power of, no, how will, sorry.
Like, power of parties or parliament?
Yeah, so how, is it possible to sort of, I don't know, reduce the power of legislatures and sort of transfer that power to the judiciary instead, or something? I don't know, or the executive, and but still have a functional democracy. Yeah, I don't know.
But I think he's still talking about the legislature, though, isn't he?
Yeah.
Or is he?
Yeah. It's let me read that paragraph again. So he says, I have argued conservatives must seek to vest the power of the state outside the forum of speculative change. in particular outside the opinion-ridden turmoil of the Commons. So he thinks that conservatives should try and argue or agitate for the removal of power from, I guess, Parliament, really. He says conservatives should uphold the judiciary, the House of Lords, and every autonomous institution through which the political process finds a tacit and faction-free enactment. So autonomous institutions, like, I guess, would be like the monarchy as well. So let's see. Yeah, I don't know.
That sounds good.
What is this screen? I think the question might be, is it possible to reduce the power of legislators and transfer powers to the judiciary / House of Lords /
or even just say like more autonomous institutions.
Yeah. And delete the and legislative bit there.
Yeah, as in, would that still be a democracy if it was like that? Or would it be more of a, I don't know.
He still talks about democracy. He says the best thing about democracy is kind of the accountability factor and the fact that people do eventually get voted out. So I guess you could just to expand on what we've written there and just be like, how do you transfer power? How do you transfer it into autonomous institutions and away from the legislature while maintaining like accountability?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Right. Sorry, could you repeat that again?
What's there already, pretty much, but just with like a while maintaining accountability at the end, pretty much.
Okay.
All right, I just realized then the functional law. There's quite a bit there already. But
Oh, like the autonomous institution. Wait, no, what?
oh yeah, I just realized I didn't see that, and they still have a.
In the brackets, we just delete the and legislative bit next to yeah.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Sorry, I didn't see the and still have a functional, because you could just have steps and still have a functional democracy as well. That was, I guess, that's.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it's a bit wordy.
Too easy.
All right, looks good.
Really good. Thanks, guys.
Go team.
Yay, love it.
Do we still have to hit the 30-minute mark exactly, or are we allowed?
No. It says around 30 minutes.
Oh, okay. Thank God, because I was like, are we gonna?
I think they'll be fine.
Thank God. Yeah, I just thought they might just look at it and be like,
No. Who's up for next week? Are we back to the start?
Yeah, I think it's back to me. So it's
all right.
Foucault or something. How do you say his name?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Foucault.
That's a big
Fun.
change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's literally like the most opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Sounds like it's going to get interesting.
It'll be good.